Hello, I'm MC Toon. Today I want to talk about crowdfunding scams and the lawyers who run them. This is the third episode I've done about the legal action against 5G. Last week I wrote an email to Lorna Hackett and her gang. I've heard nothing back from her. The way I see it, their silence means that they agree. This is a scam. It's futile. They're peddling false hopes to their donors. These people won't talk about their case because there's really nothing anybody can say to defend something this silly. These sorts of scams are common. All a lawyer needs to do is find a popular issue that will inspire donations and a strawman claimant who's willing to be used. A strawman client may seem on paper to be telling his lawyer what to do, but in reality, it's the other way around. The strawman client is just there to give the illusion of a real client, but it's actually the lawyer calling the shots. Ideally, a strawman client should be penniless, because when his case is lost, loser pays, and a client with no money cannot be made to pay the winning side's expenses. But it's not the same for the lawyers. You see, they get to keep all the money they raise as donations, as their own expenses. And if the government's lawyers can't get their expenses back from the losing claimants, the taxpayers pay the bill. The claimants get nothing at all since they never had to do anything. They only exist to provide misdirection for the legal magicians who actually run the case. In the legal action against 5G case, the people who are running this hustle is a trio of three British lawyers. Michael Mansfield QC. The QC at the end of his name means he's a very senior barrister. And in British law, a barrister is a kind of lawyer that specializes in representing clients in court. In addition, we have Philip Rule, a senior lawyer from Michael's Chambers, and a junior lawyer. Her name is Lorna Hackett. She works for a two-person law firm in Waterlooville in England. That's not quite as glamorous as where Philip and Michael work. As we will see, this trio has made running implausible legal actions their entire business model. Here's the way the crowd-funded legal campaigns are supposed to work. An individual group who feels that they have suffered some kind of injustice can raise money from the public. The money is supposed to go towards paying a lawyer so that they can have professional representation. It's the client's job to hire the lawyer and tell the lawyer what to do. But in a crowdfunding scam, it's all backwards. Instead of the client hiring a lawyer, the lawyers first identify a contentious issue and then search for clients who might be willing to be represented. One of the clearest signs that this was the tail wagging the dog was when the case started in 2020, Lorna Hackett really didn't have a clue what she was litigating about. That's why the letter before action was vague about the harms her clients had suffered. In the summer of 2020, when Lorna Hackett wrote the first letter to the British government, she only had two potential claimants, Victoria Angel and Karen Churchill. These ladies were both friends who knew each other from Facebook conspiracy groups. They were both anti-vaxxers, and that made it easy for Lorna to find them. Karen and Victoria were both eager to allow themselves to be used. But Lorna still had a problem. Neither of these claimants could show any harm that they had suffered as a result of 5G. That's why in the letter, they were both described as hypothetical victims of 5G. That is, Lorna argued that they might be harmed if all the conspiracy theories about 5G were actually true. In an exercise in legal hand-waving and bluster, the letter implies but never clearly states that the grounds for the complaint is electrical hypersensitivity, which they described as a recognized condition, and then rather vaguely cite the WHO from 2005. But if you bothered to read what the World Health Organization actually said about this condition, they wrote this. There are also some indications that these symptoms may be due to pre-existing psychiatric conditions as well as strong reactions as a result of worrying about EMF health effects rather than the EMF exposure itself. EHS has no clear diagnostic criteria, and there is no scientific basis to link EHS symptoms to EMF exposure. Further, EHS is not a medical diagnosis, nor is it clear that it represents a single medical problem. The World Health Organization goes on to suggest that the best cure for EHS is psychological counseling. In other words, the only sense in which the WHO actually recognizes electrical hypersensitivity is as a psychiatric condition. It's a delusion. Why would Lorna Hackett cite a document that calls her clients and expert witnesses delusional? Well, the answer is that she's not trying to win. The more spectacularly she loses, the more indignant she can be. She will claim that the court treated her complaint unfairly. Lorna will do this because she knows that angry donors are more likely to give generously to her next frivolous case. But even Lorna has standards. She knew that she couldn't go to court with two claimants whose only claim to victimhood was entirely hypothetical or delusional. She needed somebody who actually had been harmed by 5G, but how was she gonna find such a person? Well, as luck would have it, she didn't have to look very hard because the third claimant came to her. Lorna Hackett found Rosalind Rock after Ms. Rock posted this incoherent message on the Action Against 5G webpage. We covered Rosalind in our previous episode. Suffice it to say, she's somebody who believes that the illness that she suffered in summer of 2020 was caused by either streetlight controllers or a low-power microwave link that's about 50 meters from her ground floor apartment. She may indeed have been suffering from a real disease, but it wasn't caused by 5G or this microwave link, which she misidentified as 5G. Lorna doesn't give direct credit to Mark Steele, but it doesn't take a legal genius to notice that Rosalind Rock's claims were exactly the same as what Mark had been claiming in his own frivolous and doomed court cases. Mark Steele is a conspiracy nut from Gateshead, England, who claims that the devices on Gateshead's lampposts were in fact components of a 5G energy weapon kill grid. We've done quite a few episodes about him already. In the summer of 2020, at the same time that Rosalind Rock was making Freedom of Information requests to Hounslow Council, asking them why they were putting 5G energy weapons into lampposts, Mark Steele had been asking the same questions in Gateshead.
You've got them out on the streets outside. The LED streets outside, by the way, are a killer. The 5G LED light weapons, it's not a street light, that is a weapon. And this is a blatant weapons program. It is not a street light.
As I'm sure you know, the components that Mark Steele hilariously misidentified were actually radio-controlled light switches made by a now bankrupt British company called Harvard Electronics. I've got one right here. Its only purpose is to switch lights on and off, and Mark would have known this if he knew anything about microwave radio.
I'm not an expert in microwave radiation emissions.
Or electronics.
I'm not an electronics expert.
The only way this could be a weapon would be if somebody threw one very hard at Mark's head. Why were Mark and Rosalind pursuing the same conspiracy theories last summer? Simple. It's because they were friends. They knew each other well. They regularly phoned each other to discuss Steele's crazy fantasies. By summer of 2020, Rosalind had bought into Mark Steele's zany conspiracy theory, and by extension, so had Lorna Hackett. It's not as if Lorna could claim to have been ignorant of the kinds of clients she had recruited in this case. She had joined in on their weekly Zoom calls on a number of occasions to give them updates and to encourage them to keep raising funds. She would have to instantly recognize that her clients and their friends were all paranoid nutters. Karen Churchill, one of the original claimants, was a regular member of this group of activists. They met weekly to coordinate cell tower objections and discuss strategy. Also on these weekly calls, Lorna would have met Karen's close friend, Councillor Nicholas Martin of Wokingham Parish Council. Nicholas is the only elected politician of the Save Us Now political party, which was founded by the brothers Mark and Graham Steele. If you listen to Nicholas Martin speak, you will see that he makes precisely the same claims as Mark Steele, but in a more educated-sounding accent.
It has brought in the LED lights as far as the council is concerned. They think they're doing great work in saving the world by putting these energy-saving LED lights in. But the LED lights, as Marcus explained, house 5G antennae.
Even activists like Sally Beer, who seem uncomfortable endorsing Mark Steele because he's famous for accidentally shooting a teenager. She's perfectly happy to back Mark Steele's claims when they're spoken by somebody else, like Rosalind Rock, the new claimant in the case. She specifically asked her city council in a Freedom of Information Act request about radiation from street lighting installations. She was copying what Mark had been doing. The other transmitters, which Ms. Rock believed to be 5G targeting her yard, are actually low-power point-to-point microwave links made by Infinet. They're used to bridge a gap over a pedestrian subway crossing under one of London's busiest roads, the A40. I looked up these devices. They have at most a very weak 200 milliwatt radio. The FCC analyzed and certified them. Anyone can look up the results of the analysis on the FCC's website. We can guess that it's about 50 meters from Rosalind's house. Based on the analysis from the FCC and the distance, the maximum exposure is 0.001 milliwatts per centimeter squared. Now, if you don't deal with this topic very often, this number is meaningless. I can assure you, this is a very tiny amount. Now, I wouldn't expect Lorna Hackett to have done this calculation. She's a lawyer, not a radio engineer, but it was her job to find credible expert witnesses who could. Instead, she found Professor Tom Butler and Dr. Andrew Tresidder. Professor Butler is totally unqualified to be an expert witness. He is a professor at a real university, but his expertise is in a completely unrelated field to epidemiology or electromagnetic safety. He's a professor of business studies. Dr. Tresidder is a fringe figure, only famous for being a family doctor whose views are totally out of whack with the scientific consensus on non-ionizing radiation. Tresidder believes himself to be an electrosensitive too. That means he claims to suffer from a disease which mainstream medicine knows is a psychological delusion. Hardly likely to be a credible, impartial witness. It wasn't hard for Lorna to find this dynamic duo. They were both part of a group of so-called experts who made fools of themselves by signing on to Glastonbury's 5G Advisory Committee. They both endorsed the report that recommended the 5G BioShield, a $400 USB thumb drive marketed by Sasha Stone. The report's authors believed it could somehow protect users from 5G. Every qualified scientist on the committee resigned in protest because it was quite obvious that the crazies had taken over. When a report was finally published, it was widely mocked by the British press. Why were Lorna's star witnesses an unqualified person and a delusional quack? Why didn't she bother to identify the devices that Rosalind Rock believed was the cause of her disease? As an experienced lawyer, she must have known that her inattention to detail could not stand up to cross-examination. It was because Lorna knew that this case would never even get that far. If that sounds bizarre, consider that Lorna's case isn't the first action seeking judicial review over 5G. An almost identical case was filed and dismissed a year ago. The previous case had an entirely different group of lawyers, but was backed by the same group of activists and had a very similar claims and goals. It was just as scammy as Lorna's case, but not quite as well marketed. This older case also intended to use Professor Tom Butler as its expert witness, and you can get an idea of just how much money it was making for its founder and lawyer, Jessica.
Some of you have asked why I am charging £200 per hour for the solicitor's work which needs to be done in this case. Others have suggested that I should reduce the charge more or donate my time at no cost to do the soliciting work in this case. But any person thinking of taking action of this type will have to instruct one or more solicitors. It is unlikely that any solicitor suitable for this case will work at no cost, and much more likely that they will charge much more than £200 per hour plus VAT.
She was paying herself £2,400 per day. That's way more than Brigade 77 is paying me. Maybe I should switch sides. Sally Beer helped hype the failure of Jessica's Stop 5G case as a justification for why people needed to donate even more generously to Lorna Hackett's case. The main difference between this case and Lorna's is that Lorna added 3 claimants and a famous lawyer. But what of Michael Mansfield QC? He's a big name in British law and might seem like an unlikely addition to this case. He is near the end of his legal career, he's almost 80, and he doesn't really need the money. Well, he's allowed himself to be named as the lawyer that will represent the claimants in court, if it goes to court, knowing full well that it won't go to court. But like Lorna, he still gets paid. And if that sounds outlandish, consider that this isn't the first project that Lorna Hackett and Michael Mansfield QC have worked on. This one has the rather ambitious goal of banning industrial meat production in the UK. Do they really think that they can change something as big as farming with a judicial review? Something like that would require most of the UK to turn vegan and then elect politicians who want to change the law. This one's even stranger, a judicial review trying to force British prosecutors to investigate the Prime Minister's former advisor Dominic Cummings. Lorna really does seem to like these judicial reviews, but she doesn't seem to be very good at them. This last case has already been dismissed. According to the judge, the claimants had failed to state any behavior that was actually illegal. All of Lorna's campaigns work by hyping an issue and soliciting donations in return for a promise of legal action. All of her campaigns use Michael Mansfield as a famous figurehead in order to give desperate donors the impression that important people are finally taking their cause seriously. All of Lorna's cases are designed to sell a false, implausible hope to legally ignorant people. Her cases are futile and frivolous because, as she certainly knows, a judicial review is not a means of changing policy. It's a way to determine whether the existing policy and practice is legal. Lorna Hackett saw the failure of the 2020 Stop 5G case as an opportunity. She had built her business model entirely on running futile court cases. She'd already made connections with Mansfield, who was perfectly happy to be the front man for an implausible case as long as, he didn't actually have to do anything. He eagerly accepted his fee, knowing that this case would be dismissed. Like the rest of Lorna's cases, Lorna has a 100% failure rate at judicial review. This case has raised almost £160,000. All of this money will go to Michael, Lorna, and Philip, win or lose, and they're going to lose. All that money donated is guaranteed to go for nothing. Well, not nothing. Lorna's tactics are doing so well that she just hired a new consultant, Alexander Horne. This business model of failing at judicial reviews is raking it in. Is it sad or ironic that Sally Beer continues to hype this case on her Facebook group? She knows full well that it's based on Mark Steele's idiotic ideas, which also have a 100% failure rate. And the funny thing is that when this case inevitably forms a smoking impact crater, the donors won't blame Lorna Hackett or Michael Mansfield for selling false dreams. They won't blame Sally for false advertising. They will blame the system and the judge and be twice as eager to fund Lorna's next scam. Lorna's doing really well out of this case. She's a skilled con artist who just needed the right victims. And luckily for her, there's nobody in the world filled with such impotent rage, so ignorant of the basic science and more eager to make themselves the victims than electrosensitives. It's a match made in heaven. Well, thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe and click the bell so you can see when the next episode comes out.